My dad had a bike exactly like that one. She said it so simply, so softly, like she was just making conversation. But at that table, four men who had buried more secrets than most people ever carry, those 9 words landed like a fist against a jaw. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because the bike parked outside, it wasn't just any Harley. And her father, he wasn't just any man. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and ride with us to the end. Let's see how far this one travels. The diner on Route 58 outside Bakersfield had no name worth remembering. Just a faded sign that read, "Eat a parking lot full of cracks," and a smell of bacon grease so thick it had soaked into the walls sometime around 1987 and never left. It was the kind of place that existed not because anyone loved it, but because it was there, open at 6 in the morning, still open at 10 at night, always warm, always cheap, always just enough. It was exactly the kind of place men like them needed. 4 motorcycles sat in the parking lot, lined up with the kind of unconscious precision that only comes from years of riding together. 4 men sat in the largest corner booth, the one shoved against 2 walls so nobody could come at them from behind. Not because they expected trouble. They just never stopped expecting trouble. Old habits didn't die. They just sat down with you, ordered coffee, and waited. Gravel sat at the head. That wasn't his given name. Nobody had called him by his given name in so long he sometimes caught himself forgetting it. Gravel had earned the name the way most names in this life were earned, through something nobody particularly wanted to remember, but nobody could quite forget. He was 61 years old. He had a jaw like a concrete block hands that told 30 years of stories without ever saying a word, and eyes the color of February sky, pale cold, and yet somehow not empty. Just guarded. Always guarded. To his left sat Tank. Tank had the build his name suggested and the temperament to match, slow to move, nearly impossible to stop. He was the quiet one at the table. He communicated mostly in grunts and nods, and the other 3 had long since learned to read them like language. Across from Tank sat Gunner. He was the youngest of the 4, 53, though his face had lived about 70 years' worth of hard weather. He was the talker, the one who filled silence because silence made him uncomfortable, the one who laughed a half-second too loud and looked around afterward to see if anyone else laughed too. And then there was Reaper. Reaper sat in the corner back against both walls, watching the door, the way some men watch storm clouds, not afraid, just measuring. He was the oldest. 67? He'd been riding since before most of the people in this diner were born, and there was something in the way he held himself still, but never relaxed, that suggested a man who had seen exactly how fast a calm moment could become something else entirely. They had ridden up from Ridgecrest that morning, no particular reason, no particular destination. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes you just needed to move to let the road take the weight for a while. They had ordered food. They were waiting. The waitress came back with coffee. She was young, maybe 25, maybe a year or 2 older. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly given up on itself by mid-morning. She wore a blue apron with a coffee stain near the pocket that she clearly hadn't noticed or had stopped caring about. Her name tag said Emily in slightly crooked black letters. She poured Gravel's cup first. He didn't acknowledge it. She poured Tank's next. He nodded. She poured Gunner's, and he gave her a quick smile that she returned with the practiced warmth of someone who'd been smiling for tips since she was 19. Then she walked to the window to top off Reaper's cup, and that's when she glanced outside. Just a glance, the kind you don't think about, the kind you forget 3 seconds later. Except she didn't. Her hands slowed on this coffee pot, just slightly, just enough. "That's a beautiful bike," she said. It wasn't directed at any of them in particular, just said into the air the way people say things when they're not really starting a conversation, just letting a thought out before it becomes pressure. Gunner looked up. "Which one?" She tilted her head toward the far end of the row, toward Gravel's bike. The 72 shovelhead black Tank chrome that had been polished and repolished so many times it had its own history built into the shine, rebuilt from the frame up piece by piece over the better part of a decade. It was not a factory bike anymore. It was something closer to a monument. "That one," she said. "The black one." Gravel didn't turn around. He just wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "My dad had a bike exactly like that one," she said. Gunner smiled. "Yeah, your dad ride?" "He used to," she said. And something shifted in her voice when she said it. Something small. The difference between he does and he used to is only two letters, but it carries a weight that people who've lost something always recognize in each other. Reaper heard it. His eyes moved from the door to the girl. Used to, Gunnar said, and his voice had softened slightly, almost without his permission. She set the coffee pot down on the edge of a nearby table and folded her arms. Not closed off, just hugging herself a little. He doesn't ride anymore, not since my mom died. She said it plainly, the way people say things they've had to say so many times that the sharp edges have worn off. But the edges were still there. You could see them if you looked. I'm sorry, Gunnar said. It was a long time ago, she said. I was 10. Nobody said anything for a moment. Tank looked at his coffee. Reaper's eyes stayed on her face. He had that same model, she continued, and now she was looking at the bike through the glass with an expression that was trying to be casual and not quite succeeding. Exact color, same chrome. He used to take it out on Sundays. Me and my mom would sit on the porch and listen for it coming back down the road. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that's made mostly out of something else. I always knew it was him before I could see him. The sound. Gravel's hands tightened around the mug, just slightly. Just enough. What's your dad's name? Reaper asked. It was the first time he'd spoken since they sat down. His voice was low, deliberate. It moved through the air of the diner like something that expected to be heard. Emily looked at him. Something in his stillness made people pay attention. Miller, she said. Jack Miller. The silence came down so fast and so complete that Gunnar's half-formed response died somewhere between his brain and his mouth. Tank's cup stopped halfway to his lips. Reaper's eyes didn't move. They just changed. The way a face changes when a name reaches something buried so deep, the body reacts before the mind can stop it. Gravel stared at the table. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped below his right ear once and then was still. Emily didn't notice. Or if she noticed, she didn't know what she was seeing. She picked up the coffee pot and glanced at their cups again, checking out of habit. You guys need anything else? Jack Miller, Gravel said. His voice was quiet, almost careful. She looked at him directly for the first time. Yeah, you know him. A pause, long enough to mean something. We used to, Gravel said. Bap. She didn't ask follow-up questions right away. There were other tables. A couple near the window flagged her down. An older man at the counter needed a refill. She moved with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to exist in 4 places at once, and the 4 men in the corner booth sat in the kind of stillness that had weight. Jack Miller, Tank said very quietly once she was out of earshot. Nobody answered him. There wasn't anything to say to that wouldn't make it worse. Gunnar leaned forward on both forearms. You think it's the same? How many Jack Millers you think are in Bakersfield? Reaper said. Gunnar closed his mouth. Gravel was still looking at the table. He turned the coffee mug a quarter turn, then back. She said her mom died when she was 10. That tracks, Reaper said. Karen died. He stopped, recalculated. 15 years ago, she'd have been about 10. Karen, Gunnar repeated, like the name itself cost something to say. Gravel set the mug down. He was at my house 2 nights before the accident. We were working on the carb on my old FLH, just the 2 of us. It was late. He said Karen wanted him home, but he was going to stay another hour. He paused. He stayed 3. Nobody asked why he was telling them this. They all knew why. He blamed himself, Reaper said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a... He said if he'd gone home when she called, she wouldn't have gone out to get dinner herself. Wouldn't have been on Route 14 at that hour. Gravel's voice stayed even. Even was the only gear he had in moments like this. He said it every time I talked to him after. Every single time. Like if he said it enough times, something would change. He called me a lot, Tank said suddenly. His voice was rough, like the words had trouble getting out. After, I picked up the first few times. Then He stopped. The sentence didn't need an ending. They all had one. He called me too, Gunnar said. Low. I told him I'd come by, then I didn't. Then I told myself he needed space. He shook his head slowly. I've been telling myself that for 15 years, that he needed space. He said the word space like it tasted wrong. We were afraid, Reaper said simply. Gunnar looked up. That's the truth of it, Reaper continued. We weren't respecting his grief. We didn't know what to do with his grief. So we told ourselves it was respect and we stayed away. He took a slow sip of coffee. We left him. The words sat there. Left. Not lost touch. Not drifted apart. Not any of the softer versions they'd allowed themselves over the years. Left. Tank set his cup down carefully. She said he doesn't ride anymore. No, Gravel said, the bike's still there. She didn't say it wasn't. Emily came back. She moved efficiently, refilling without being asked the small professional choreography of someone good at her job. And she kept talking, not because she was nosy, but because they'd shown her a crack of something personal. And people, real people, tend to walk toward open doors. He keeps it in the garage, she said, setting down a small plate of creamer cups that nobody had asked for. Hasn't touched it in years. Not since Mom died. I used to try to get him to take it out when I was a teenager. I thought it would help him. She shrugged, but there was something tired in it. He'd just say it wasn't time. He still lives in Bakersfield, Reaper asked. She looked at him again. That focused stillness kept pulling people's attention. Maple Street, same house I grew up in. She tilted her head slightly. Why, you really knew him? Yeah, Gravel said. We really knew him. She read something in his face. Whatever she read made her set the coffee pot down, again this time fully. This time like she wasn't planning to pick it back up for a minute. How? The way men like us know each other, Gravel said. Then because that wasn't enough, because she deserved more than that, he said, we rode together a long time. Emily was quiet for a moment. She looked at the four of them, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. A recalibration. The kind that happens when you suddenly understand the context of something you thought you already understood. He never talked about his writing friends much, she said slowly. After Mom died. Before that, I remember hearing names. I was little. I didn't pay much attention. She paused. He got pretty isolated. After. Yeah, Gravel said. We know. She looked at him sharply. Just briefly. And in that one look was a daughter's entire complicated history with her father's grief, the helplessness, the worry, the love that never knew where to put itself. Did you try to reach him? She asked. And there it was. Not an accusation. Her voice was genuinely asking. She wasn't trying to wound anyone. She was 25 years old and she was asking a simple question because she actually wanted to know. But it hit each of them differently. Gunnar looked away. Tank's thumb moved back and forth against the handle of his cup. Reaper looked directly at her because Reaper had always believed you owed people your eyes when they asked you something real. Not enough, he said. We didn't try enough. Emily absorbed that. She nodded slowly the way people nod when they've suspected something for a long time and just had it confirmed. He gets lonely, she said quietly. I worry about him. I try to get over there as much as I can, but I work doubles 3 days a week and... She stopped herself, shook her head slightly. Sorry, you don't need to hear all that. We do, Gravel said. She looked at him. We need to hear all of it, he said. She told them more than she probably intended to. That was the thing about the four of them. When they actually turned their full attention towards someone, it was a lot of attention. Gravel listened the way a mountain listens, completely, still absorbing everything. Reaper's eyes never moved from her face, not unkindly, just with total focus. Even Tank and Gunnar had stopped fidgeting, stopped scanning the room, stopped doing all the small defensive things they usually did in public places. She told them Jack worked part-time at an auto parts store now, that he'd had to cut back his hours because his back had gotten worse, that he spent most evenings in the garage not working on anything, not fixing anything, just sitting in the garage the way some men sit in front of televisions just being somewhere familiar. That sometimes she'd stop by and find him asleep in the old folding chair next to the covered Harley, a half-finished beer in his hand, country radio playing low. He talks to it sometimes, she said, and then seems surprised she'd said it. The bike, when he doesn't know I'm there. She looked at them carefully, measuring the reaction. Finding none that made her feel judged, she continued. I used to think it was sad. Now I think it's just he's talking to her, to my mom. The bike was hers too, in a way. She loved it as much as he did. Reaper made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something deep in his chest. He covered it by picking up his cup, but his hand wasn't entirely steady. Gravel stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically. He just stood the way a man stands when he's made a decision and his body is simply responding before his mouth does. "How much do we owe you?" he said. Emily blinked. "Oh, she reached for the check in her apron. 42 with the food." Gravel reached into his jacket. He put 60 on the table. He looked at Emily for a moment directly with those cold sky eyes that had thawed about 3 degrees in the last 20 minutes. "Your dad was a good man," he said. "One of the best I've known, and we let him down." He picked up his jacket from the seat. "We're going to go try to do something about that." Emily stood completely still. "You're going to Maple Street, if you'll tell me the address." She stared at him, then at Reaper, then back at Gravel. Something in her face moved cracked just at the edges, and she put her hand over her mouth once quickly before she pulled it back down. She was not going to cry in front of strangers in this diner. She had her own version of a jaw like concrete. 2317, she said. "Greenhouse. Garage on the left side." Gravel nodded. He put on his jacket. "He might not," she started, then stopped, then made herself continue. "He might not want to see you. He's got a lot of walls up." "I know," Gravel said. "He might be angry." "He should be." She blinked again. That wasn't the answer she expected. It was the right one, and some part of her recognized that, and it undid her just a little. "Tell him I sent you," she said. "Tell him Emily sent you. He'll at least open the door for that." Gravel picked up his coffee one last time, drained the last of it, set the cup down. "You did something today," he said. "You don't know what, but you did something." He walked toward the door. The other 3 stood and followed one by one the way they always had, Tank, then Gunner, then Reaper, last, who paused at the edge of the table. "He called me 14 times, Reaper said quietly. Not to her, not to himself, just into the air like a confession without a confessional. In the first 3 months after Karen died, 14 times. He put his jacket on slowly. I answered twice. He walked out the door. Emily stood at the edge of the empty booth. She looked at the $60 on the table. She looked at the door. Through the window, she watched 4 men walk to 4 motorcycles with the particular gravity of people who have just remembered that they owe something they can't pay back in full, but are going to try anyway. The engine started, one by one, and then they were gone. Emily picked up the money from the table. She stood there holding it. Behind her, the couple by the window wanted more water. The man at the counter was raising his hand again. She put the money in her apron pocket. She picked up the coffee pot. And she stood completely still for one more moment because something had just happened in this ordinary diner on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and she wasn't entirely sure what it was, only that it was the first time in 15 years she felt without any logical reason to like. Maybe her father wasn't as alone as she'd believed. She went back to work. On Maple Street, 2317, a greenhouse sat quiet in the mid-morning. And in the garage on the left side, covered under a canvas tarp, an old Harley waited. The road from the diner to Maple Street was 11 minutes. Gravel knew because he had already put it into his phone before he'd even finished buttoning his jacket. He didn't say that to the others. He just pulled out first, and they fell in behind him the way they always had. Tank on his left flank, Gunner on his right, Reaper at the rear. 4 bikes, 1 formation, 15 years too late. Nobody talked on the ride. You couldn't at highway speed, not without the intercoms they'd stopped bothering with years ago. But even if they could have talked, Gravel doubted any of them would have. There was nothing to say that the road wasn't already saying for them, and every mile closer was a mile of reckoning. Every stop sign, a small moment to breathe. Every green light, an excuse not to think too hard about what was waiting at the end of it. Gravel thought about the last time he'd seen Jack Miller. It was at Karen's funeral. 15 years ago, February. One of those California winter days that can't quite commit to being cold but manages to be gray enough to feel like an insult. Jack had stood at the grave in his good jacket, the dark blue one Karen had bought him for their 10th anniversary, and he hadn't cried. He just stood there with this look on his face that Gravel had never seen on him before and never wanted to see again. Not grief exactly, something deeper than grief, something that had already decided it was permanent. Gravel had put his hand on Jack's shoulder at the end. Jack had nodded. They had not hugged. Men like them didn't do that easily. He told himself they'd talk more later. They didn't. That was the last time. The formation turned onto Maple Street. Greenhouse, garage on the left, 2317. Gravel pulled up to the curb and cut the engine. The others followed one by one, and then it was quiet, the sudden specific quiet of 4 engines stopping at once, which always felt to Gravel like a held breath. The house looked lived in, not neglected, not kept up, just inhabited the way a place looks when someone's been there long enough that they stop seeing it anymore. The front curtains were drawn. There was a truck in the driveway, mid-90s, dark red, one of the rear panels showing primer, where someone had started a repair job and not finished it. The garage was closed. "He's home," Tank said, not a question. "Truck's here," Gunner said. Reaper had already gotten off his bike and was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the house with the calm of someone who had already made his peace with however this was going to go. "Someone's got to knock," he said. "I'll do it," Gravel said. He walked up the front path. His boots were loud on the concrete. He was aware of that. He had the sudden strange sensation of being too large for the moment, too much leather, too much noise, too much of everything standing on the porch of a small green house trying to figure out what to do with his hands. He knocked. 3 times. Even. Not hard, not soft, just present. Nothing for a moment. Then a sound inside, movement. The particular cadence of someone moving through a house who isn't expecting anyone and isn't in a hurry to get there. The door opened. Jack Miller looked at him for exactly 3 seconds before his face did something complicated and painful and completely unreadable. He was 59 years old. He'd been a big man once, broad through the chest, strong in the way that comes from actual work and not a gym, and some of that was still there, but time and grief had put a kind of compression on him, like something had been pressing down on him from the shoulders for 15 years, and he just slowly adjusted to carrying it. His hair was gray now, short, unkempt, in the way of someone who'd stopped caring about it around the same time as everything else. He was wearing a flannel shirt, jeans, work boots. He had a dish towel in one hand, which told Gravel he'd interrupted lunch. The dish towel fell, not dramatically, it just dropped, from fingers that had gone slack. "Gravel," he said, just that, just the name, like he was testing whether it was real. "Hey, Jack," Gravel said, and then neither of them said anything for a moment that felt much longer than it was, and in that silence, 15 years of accumulated absence pressed against both of them like weather. "What are you doing here?" Jack said. It wasn't quite a question. It had the flatness of a statement, but with something underneath it, not warmth, not cold, something that hadn't decided yet what it was. "Came to see you," Gravel said. Jack's eyes moved past him, down the path, to the curb where Tank and Gunner and Reaper were still standing by the bikes, not moving closer, giving Jack space to process the first hit before the rest landed. Something moved across Jack's face, recognition sharp and fast like a match striking, and then something else right behind it. Something with teeth. "All of you," Jack said. "All of us," Gravel said. Jack's jaw set. His hand tightened on the doorframe. Not shaking, Jack Miller didn't shake, had never shaken. It was one of the things about him, but the pressure in his grip was the kind that comes from keeping everything else very, very still. "Why," he said. "Why today? Why now?" "We were at the diner off Route 58 this morning," Gravel said. "Your daughter was our waitress." Something happened to Jack's face at the word daughter that was completely unguarded. Just for a half second. Like the armor had a gap right there, right at that word, and Gravel saw straight through it to something soft and frightened and real. Then it closed again. "Emily," he said. "Emily," Gravel confirmed. "She talked about you. She talked about your bike." Jack was quiet. "She doesn't know who we are," Gravel said. "She just talked. The way people do." He paused. "She told us your address. She said to tell you she sent us." "Of course she did." Jack said it quietly, and there was love in it. Complicated, exhausted love. The love of a man who knows his daughter worries about him and can't decide whether to be grateful or guilty. He looked at Gravel for a long moment, then passed him again at the others. "This supposed to be some kind of what, reunion?" "No," Gravel said. "Then what?" Gravel didn't have a clean answer. He'd thought about it on the ride over, and he still didn't have one that felt honest and neat. So he said the one honest thing he had, "We don't know yet. We just knew we couldn't drive past this house without stopping." Jack stared at him. "Took you 15 years to drive past it." There it was, right there in those 8 words, the whole of it. Gravel didn't look away. "Yeah," he said, "it did." The silence stretched. A car went by on the street. One of the guys, Gunner, probably shifted his weight. Jack looked down at the dish towel on the porch floor. He bent slowly and picked it up, folded it, not because he needed to, just because his hands needed something to do. "You better come in," he said. "All of you." He stepped back from the door. Gravel turned and made a small motion to the others. They came up the path single file, pulling off their cuts, before going inside an old habit that Jack himself had once insisted on: a respect for the house, a separation between the road and the home. Jack saw that. Gravel watched him see it. Something shifted infinitesimally in the set of Jack's shoulders. They came inside. The living room was exactly what it was. A couch that had given up its shape years ago, a television, a bookshelf with more automotive manuals than anything else. A framed photo on the wall, Karen and Jack Young laughing in front of a bike, Gravel recognized as the shovelhead in its early days before all the rebuilding. Karen had her arms around Jack's neck, and she was laughing at something off camera, and she was so alive in the photo that looking at it was like a small physical impact. Gunnar saw it and very carefully did not look at it again. Reaper looked at it for a long time. Jack moved into the kitchen. "Coffee?" he said. His voice was controlled, now settled into the cadence of hospitality, which was the one mode that let him function without feeling everything at full volume. "Please," Tank said. Jack put the coffee on. The four of them sat or stood in the small living room with the specific awkwardness of large men in small spaces, made worse by the fact that the awkwardness wasn't really about the room. It was about everything the room contained. All the history in the walls, all the years in the furniture. "She looks like her," Gunnar said quietly. Jack went still at the counter. "What? Emily?" Gunnar's voice was careful. Not tiptoeing, Gunnar was constitutionally incapable of tiptoeing, but careful. "She's got Karen's eyes, same way of tilting her head when she's listening." A beat, long enough to matter. "Yeah," Jack said, "I know." He didn't say anything else. He poured coffee. He came back into the room with mugs, distributed them, and then stood, rather than sat, and that standing was its own kind of statement. "I'm here, but I'm not settled. I'm here, but I haven't decided to be yet." "So," he said, "here we are." "Here we are," Gravel said. "What do you want me to say?" Jack asked. Not hostile, not yet, just direct. He'd always been direct. It was one of the things. "You want me to say it's fine, that it's good to see you?" He paused. "Is it good to see you?" "You don't have to say anything," Reaper said. "Seems like someone should." Jack looked at him. "You always were the one who told the truth, Reaper, even when nobody wanted to hear it. So you tell me, what is this? What are you four doing at my door on a Tuesday morning?" Reaper put his coffee mug down on the side table, carefully. He laced his fingers together and looked at Jack with those steady, weathered eyes. "We came because a 25-year-old girl waited on us at a diner and talked about her father like he was someone she was afraid of losing, even though she hadn't lost him yet," he said. "And because when she said your name, every one of us at that table felt it like a gut punch." He paused. "And because we've been carrying something for 15 years that we never dealt with, and we're old enough now to know that doesn't get lighter on its own." Jack looked at him, his grip on his own mug tightened. "Say it plain." "We left you," Reaper said. "When Karen died and you fell apart, and you had every right to fall apart, we got uncomfortable and we called it respect, and we left you. We told ourselves you needed space. The truth was, we needed the space. We didn't know what to do with your grief. So we disappeared and we let you disappear, and we told ourselves it was the right thing, or 15 years, because it was easier than this." He gestured at the room, at the four of them, at Jack's face. "Easier than this moment right here." The room was very quiet. Jack's jaw worked. He looked at the floor. He looked at the photo on the wall, couldn't seem to help it. It pulled his eyes the way it always did. He looked back at Gravel. "I called you," he said, "after she died. I called you 30 times, Gravel. 30 times, I know, because I counted them. I had nothing but time, and I counted every single unanswered call." Gravel held his gaze. Didn't flinch. Deserved not to flinch. "I know. You answered 4 times. 4 times, Gravel confirmed. "And each time I answered, I told you I'd come by, and I didn't." "Why?" Jack said. And the word was so raw, so genuinely asking, not rhetorical, not angry. Just why, the real question, the one he'd been carrying for 15 years without an answer, that Gunnar made a sound in the back of his throat and had to look at the ceiling. "Because," Gravel said slowly, "every time I heard your voice, I could hear what had happened to you, and I couldn't. He stopped, started again. You were always the strongest one of us, Jack. You were the one who showed up when any of us needed anything. You were the one who rode 40 miles to sit with Martinez in the hospital every day for 3 weeks after his accident. Every day, without being asked. Nobody asked you to do that. You just did it. He set his own mug down. When it was your turn to need that, when it was your turn to be the one in the chair, I panicked. I didn't know how to be what you'd been for all of us, and instead of trying, I hid. Silence. Then Tank's voice, low and rough from the corner where he'd settled his large frame against the wall. I told my wife you probably wanted privacy. She told me that it was bull. She was right. I was scared. I'm saying it. Jack looked at him. Tank met his eyes and didn't look away. Gunner, Jack said. Gunner had both hands around his mug. He'd been staring into it. He looked up. I drove to your street twice, he said, both times within the first month. I sat in my truck for about 20 minutes. Both times, then I left. He shook his head. I told myself you'd call when you were ready. You called. I didn't pick up. Jack absorbed this. His face was doing something, complex emotions moving through it in layers like weather systems passing over each other. You drove here twice, he said. Twice, Gunner said. I sat right outside. And you left. And I left. A sound came out of Jack then. Not quite a laugh, not quite a something in between that had no clean name, just air moving through a chest that had held too much for too long. He turned away from them, walked to the window, stood with his back to them for a moment. His hand came up to the back of his neck, squeezed, then dropped. You know what the worst part is? He said, still facing the window. The worst part isn't that you didn't come. The worst part is that after a while I stopped expecting you. And then after that I stopped expecting anyone. He paused. And when you stopped expecting people, you stopped reaching out. And when you stopped reaching out, you stopped... He didn't finish the sentence, but they all heard the end of it. You stop living, you just exist. You sit in a garage next to a covered motorcycle and talk to a woman who isn't there anymore and call it getting through the day. Reaper stood up from his chair. He crossed the small living room and stood next to Jack, not quite beside him, giving him the space to stay, turned away if he needed to. Then we stopped coming, Reaper said, and that's on us. That is entirely on us. But Jack... He waited until Jack turned, until their eyes met. You've been punishing yourself for 15 years for something that was an accident, Karen's accident. And now you're living in a house where you don't touch the thing that mattered most to both of you, and your daughter works double shifts, 3 days a week, worrying herself sick about you, and you're sleeping in a folding chair in the garage. Jack's eyes sharpened. Emily told you that. She didn't say it like it was a complaint, Reaper said immediately. She said it like someone who loves you so much it scares her. Something cracked. Not fully, Jack Miller didn't crack fully, probably never would, but something at the surface gave way just slightly, like ice at the edge of a thaw. His eyes were bright. He blinked once, hard. She worries too much, he said, and his voice was rough at the edges. She worries exactly the right amount, Reaper said. And she's got her father's instincts. You taught her that. She walked up to 4 strangers in leather and talked to us like we were just people. You gave her that. Jack said nothing. He turned back to the window. The bike, Gravel said from across the room. Quiet but direct. Is it still there? Long pause. Garage, Jack said. Has anyone touched it? No. In 15 years? No. Then after a beat, I touch it. Sometimes, just not running, He stopped. Karen used to sit on it, in the garage, before I'd take it out. She'd sit on it and tell me where she wanted to go, and I'd say yes to all of it, and then we'd argue about it on the road and end up somewhere neither of us planned, and it was always better. His voice had gone somewhere else, somewhere 15 years back in a garage in February, before everything. I tried to take it out once, about 3 years after, got it started, backed it out of the garage, sat on it in the driveway for about 10 minutes. He was quiet. Couldn't do it. Nobody spoke. It still runs, he said. I maintain it. Fluids, battery, tender tires. It runs. I just don't... He pressed his lips together. I just don't go anywhere on it. Gravel stood up slowly from the couch. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, all 6 feet and 30 years of road experience of him, and he looked at his oldest friend across this small living room with its sagging couch and its photo of a laughing woman who wasn't here anymore, and he said, "Show us." Jack turned around and, "Show us the bike, Jack." The room held its breath. Jack Miller looked at each of them one by one. Gravel, Tank, Gunner, Reaper. 4 men who had failed him. 4 men who had driven 11 minutes and then 15 years to stand in his living room and say so. He looked at his hands. Then he walked to the door that led to the garage and he pushed it open, and he didn't look back to see if they were following. They were. The door swung open and Jack walked through it without hesitating, which told Gravel more than anything Jack had said in the living room. A man who truly couldn't face something didn't walk toward it with that kind of tired purpose. He walked toward it the way people walk toward graves, not because it felt good, but because something in them required it. Because some part of them believed that presence, even painful presence, was better than absence. The 4 of them followed him in. The garage smelled like oil and rubber and cold metal and time. That particular combination that lives in every serious mechanic's space, not dirty, not clean, just deeply, permanently itself. A workbench ran along one wall, tools hanging above it in the specific order of a man who knew exactly where everything was and put it back that way every single time. That kind of order wasn't neatness, it was control. It was the one area of life where Jack Miller still knew exactly where things belonged. And in the center of it all, under a canvas tarp that had once been dark green and had faded to something between gray and memory, was the shape of the bike. Nobody moved toward it. Jack stood a few feet away from it, with his arms crossed, not looking at it directly the way you don't look directly at something that's too bright or too heavy. He was looking at the workbench, at his tools, at everything that wasn't the tarp. Gravel looked at the covered bike and thought about the last time he'd seen it uncovered. Karen alive. Jack laughing. The 3 of them in the same garage, or maybe it had been Gravel's garage memory, was slippery with beers and a radio and the easy comfort of people who didn't need to perform anything for each other. The bike had been mid-rebuild then. Jack's hands always had some project. That was Jack. He couldn't let a thing stay broken, except himself. He'd let that stay broken. "You maintain it, but you don't ride it," Tank said. He said it without judgment, just repeating what Jack had told them, as if hearing it in the garage made it different from hearing it in the living room. It did. "Every 6 months, Jack said. Fluids, check the cables, keep the battery from dying." He paused. "It starts, first or second kick usually. I don't know why he stopped, shifted his weight. "I don't know why I bother exactly. Habit, maybe. Because you can't let it die," Reaper said. Jack looked at him. "Same reason you haven't sold it, same reason you keep the battery tender on it." Reaper was watching him with that particular steadiness. He had not pushing, not soft, just level. Because letting it die would be letting something of her die, and you're not ready to do that. Jack's jaw tightened. "Don't analyze me." "I'm not analyzing you," Reaper said. "I'm agreeing with you." A beat. Jack's jaw relaxed just slightly. He looked back at the tarp. Gunner had moved to the workbench without really thinking about it, the way men who work with their hands always gravitate toward tools. He picked up a wrench, turned it over, set it back exactly where it had been. "This is organized better than any shop I've ever been in," he said. "And I've been in a lot of shops." "Karen made me organize it," Jack said, and he almost smiled. Almost, just a ghost of it crossing his face and leaving before it fully arrived. "She said she was tired of watching me spend 20 minutes looking for the same socket every time. So she stood in here one Saturday morning and she told me where everything was going, and I argued with her about every single item, and then I put them all exactly where she said." He paused. "She was right about everyone." "Of course she was," Tank said. "Of course she was," Jack said. And this time there was warmth in it. Buried, pressed down, but real. Gravel took one step toward the tarp, just one. He looked at Jack. "Can I?" Jack's body went rigid, every muscle in his back and shoulders visible, even through the flannel. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the floor between himself and the covered bike. His hands came uncrossed, dropped to his sides. His fingers opened and closed once. "Yeah," he said. His voice was barely above a speaking voice. "Go ahead." Gravel crouched down and took the edge of the canvas in both hands. He pulled it back slowly from front to back, way you'd pull a sheet back carefully with intention, not revealing everything at once. Like the thing underneath deserved the moment. The chrome came into the light first, then the black tank, then the full length of it, the 1972 shovelhead rebuilt and maintained and loved and unridden, sitting in exactly the position Jack had last left it, like time had suspended around it, while everything else in the world kept moving. Tank made a low sound. "Damn," he said quietly. "She's perfect," Gunner said. He wasn't talking to anyone, just saying it. Jack was looking at the bike now. He couldn't not. Now that the tarp was off, there was nothing to look at in the garage that wasn't it. It pulled everything, every eye, every breath in the room the way a significant thing does when it finally stops being hidden. His face was doing something that had no simple name. It was grief and pride and love and fury and longing, all occupying the same expression at the same time, each one fighting for space, none of them winning. "You've kept it this beautiful," Gravel said, "for 15 years, by yourself." "It's not hard," Jack said. "I know every inch of it. I built most of it." His voice was flat, but his eyes weren't. "We built it together, actually. Karen and me. She handed me parts, held the flashlight. She didn't know a rocker arm from a push rod, and she didn't care. She said the important thing was that we were doing it together." He was quiet for a moment. She was right about that, too. Reaper walked slowly to the other side of the bike. He crouched slightly, looking at the engine, the lines of it, the careful work in every joint and surface. "Jack," he said, "do you remember what you told Martinez when he was in the hospital after his accident? When he said he was never getting on a bike again?" Jack said nothing. "You told him that the bike didn't put him in that hospital. Bad luck and bad timing put him in that hospital. And that if he stopped riding because of it, then the accident would have taken something it had no right to take." Reaper stood back up, looked at Jack directly. "You sat with him every day for 3 weeks and told him that. Different ways, same message every single day, until he believed it." "That's different," Jack said. "How Martinez's wife didn't die." "No," Reaper said. "She didn't. But Karen didn't die because of the bike, Jack. Karen died because she was on Route 14 at the wrong time. You staying an extra 2 hours at Gravel's didn't cause a drunk driver to run a red light." The word drunk driver landed in the garage like a dropped tool, loud, metallic, impossible to ignore. Gravel looked at Reaper. He hadn't known that detail. Reaper had known, had apparently known all along, and chosen this moment, this specific moment in front of the bike, with Jack's defenses already cracked open to say it. Jack's face went white, then red, then something that was neither. "Don't," he said. "Jack." "I said don't." His voice had an edge in it now, sharp and real and 15 years deep. "You don't get to come in here and use that to make me feel better about myself. I've heard that argument. I've told it to myself 1,000 times. Knowing the cause doesn't fix the guilt. Knowing it wasn't your fault doesn't mean it doesn't feel like it was." His hands were at his sides and they were shaking now, visibly slightly, the tremor of a man holding a great deal very tightly. "You know what I did the morning of the accident? I kissed her when I left. I kissed her and she asked me to come home by 7 because she was making the chicken thing I liked. And I said, yeah. And I stayed at Gravel's until 10. He looked at Gravel, and she went out to get food because I wasn't home. And there was a drunk on Route 14. "Jack," Gravel said. "So don't tell me about cause and guilt like they're the same thing," Jack said. "Because they're not. You can know something and still feel it." Nobody argued with him because he was right. He was absolutely right, and they all knew it, and the knowing of it was its own kind of weight that settled into the garage alongside everything else. Tank moved. He crossed the garage in 3 steps. Tank, who communicated in grunts and nods. Tank, who nobody ever accused of being eloquent. And he put his hand on Jack's shoulder. Not a pat, not a quick touch. He put his hand on Jack's shoulder the way you hold something that matters with weight and intention, and he kept it there. Jack didn't shake him off. That was everything. "We should have shown up," Tank said. "That's all. We should have just shown up. Knocked on the door, made you let us in. We should have sat in this garage and let you say all of this 15 years ago, and we should have taken it. That's what we should have done." His hand tightened on Jack's shoulder briefly. "We didn't. That's on us. I'm sorry." Jack stood very still, Tank's hand on his shoulder. The bike uncovered in front of him. All four of them in this garage that had been only his for 15 years. "You're all sorry," Jack said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite anger anymore. Something that was moving towards something else, but hadn't arrived yet. "Everybody's sorry. I've been sorry for 15 years. Sorry doesn't build anything." "No," Gravel said. "It doesn't." He came to stand beside Tank on Jack's other side, not touching, just present. "But it's the start. The start of what? Of not pretending anymore." Jack looked at him. "We've been pretending for 15 years," Gravel said. "Every time one of us rode past this town, every time someone mentioned your name at the table and we changed the subject, every time we told ourselves you were fine, that you'd reached out if you needed us, that you probably had people. We knew you didn't. We knew Jack. We just didn't want to know it out loud." He held Jack's gaze. "I'm done pretending. That's why I'm here. Not because I have answers. Not because I can fix 15 years. Because I'm done pretending." The garage was so quiet they could hear the traffic from the street, distant, removed from all of this. Jack looked at the bike for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "She used to say it was the most honest thing about me. The bike. She said when I was on it, I couldn't pretend to be anything other than exactly what I was." He almost laughed. "She said she fell in love with me because of how I looked on it. Not how I looked physically. How I looked like myself, like I was completely at home in the world." He reached out and touched the handlebar, one hand light, like something he'd been not doing for 10 years and couldn't stop himself from doing now. "I don't feel like that anymore. I haven't felt at home in the world since she left." Nobody spoke. His hand stayed on the handlebar. "I've been scared," he said. His voice was stripped down now. No armor left in it, just words plain and true in a cold garage in Bakersfield. "I've been scared that if I ride it again, I'll feel her everywhere on it and I won't be able to stand it. And I've been scared that if I ride it again, I won't feel her at all. I don't know which one is worse." Reaper quietly, "Maybe neither of those things happens. Maybe something else does." "Like what?" "I don't know," Reaper said honestly, "but you won't know either until you try." Jack's hand tightened on the handlebar. His knuckles went white. He stood there in this garage that had been his private world, his preserved room of grief and memory and love, with four men he hadn't seen in 15 years, standing witness, and he held onto the handlebar of a bike he hadn't ridden in a decade. And then his phone buzzed on the workbench. He didn't move to get it, but the screen lit up where it lay, and from where Gunnar was standing, he could see the name on the screen. Emily. Gunnar glanced at Gravel. Gravel saw it too. The phone buzzed again. Jack finally released the handlebar and picked it up. He answered it without turning away from them. "Hey, sweetheart." A pause, then in a voice that carried across the quiet garage, Emily. "Dad, are they there?" Jack's eyes moved across the four men. "Yeah," he said, "they're here." Another pause. "Are you okay?" Jack was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't avoiding the question, it's actually finding the answer, rather than reaching for the automatic one. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "But I'm okay enough." He could hear the breath she let out on the other end of the phone, the relief in it. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I get off at 4. I'm coming over." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." Something in Jack's face shifted. The compression that had been on him, the long, slow weight of 15 years pressing down, didn't lift exactly, but it loosened just slightly, the way a knot loosens before it's untied. "All right," he said. "I'll put more coffee on." He ended the call, stood holding the phone. The garage was silent except for the distant street. "She's coming," Gravel said. Not a question. 4 o'clock, Jack said. "We'll be gone before then," Reaper said, "if that's what you want." Jack turned the phone over in his hands. He looked at the bike, he looked at each of them, and then he did something none of them had been prepared for. He laughed, not a bitter laugh, not a performed one, but a real one, short and rough and surprised like it had come out without his permission. "She's going to walk in here and see the tarp off," he said. "She's going to lose her mind." Gunnar blinked. "She's never seen it uncovered." "I always put the tarp back before she could see it," Jack said. "I didn't want her to, I don't know, worry about me more than she already does." He shook his head slowly, that almost smile back again. "She's going to see it, and she's going to cry, and she's going to pretend she isn't." Like her father, Reaper said. Jack looked at him. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, nothing that clean or quick, but something. Recognition, maybe. The kind that happens between two men who have been truthful with each other and can't unsay it. Like her father, Jack said. And in that garage in Bakersfield, in the company of four men who had finally stopped running from what they'd done, Jack Miller stood next to an uncovered Harley for the first time in 10 years and did not cover it back up. The tarp stayed off. That was the first thing. The tarp stayed off and nobody suggested putting it back, and Jack didn't reach for it. And that small fact, that simple, uncomplicated fact, sat in the garage among the five of them like a quiet agreement that nobody had to say out loud. They moved back into the house after a while, not because anyone wanted to leave the garage exactly, but because standing around a motorcycle in silence eventually becomes its own kind of pressure. And Jack needed to move, needed to do something with his hands. So he went back to the kitchen and they followed him, and he made sandwiches. That was what he did. He pulled bread and lunch meat from the refrigerator and he made 5 sandwiches on the counter without asking anyone if they wanted one. And the act of it, the ordinary domestic, completely unremarkable act of making sandwiches for people in his kitchen, was so different from everything that had been happening in the last 2 hours that Gunnar had to press his lips together and look at the ceiling again for a second. Gravel ate his sandwich, standing at the counter. Tank sat at the small kitchen table. Reaper leaned against the door frame between the kitchen and the living room, eating slowly, watching Jack the way he watched everything with the calm assessment of someone who was keeping track. "You still work at AutoZone?" Gunnar asked. "Napa," Jack said. "Different store, 3 days a week now, my back." He said it without self-pity, just fact. "You need the hours?" Gunnar asked. Jack looked at him, not offended, measuring. "I get by." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "I'm fine, Gunnar." "Okay," Gunnar said. And then, because he was Gunnar and he couldn't leave things alone when they needed to be said, because we've got a guy who does books for the chapter now. Real accountant, not just somebody who can add. And if there's ever anything, Gunnar, Gravel said, not sharp, just a stop. Gunnar stopped. Jack shook his head slightly, not angry, almost amused in a way that was also tired. "It's all right, I know what he means." He looked at Gunnar directly. "I appreciate it. I do. But I've been taking care of myself for 15 years. I know how to do that much." "You shouldn't have had to," Tank said from the table. The words were simple. 5 words. Tank said them into a sandwich, not making a production of it, just saying the true thing plainly the way he sometimes did when everyone else was dancing around it. "You shouldn't have had to take care of yourself alone. You should have had us. You didn't. And that's not a small thing." Jack looked at him. Tank looked back. "No," Jack said quietly. "I shouldn't have." That was the second thing that settled in the room and stayed. They ate. The kitchen clock moved. Outside, Bakersfield went about its Tuesday with complete indifference to what was happening in this small house on Maple Street. Cars went by. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The refrigerator hummed. Life continued to be ordinary around the edges of something that wasn't ordinary at all. It was Reaper who finally said what all of them had been circling since the garage. He finished his sandwich, set the plate on the counter, and looked at Jack with the directness that was simply his nature, the quality that had always made him both the hardest and the most reliable person in any room. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." Jack looked at him. "All right. We've been talking today about what we did wrong, what we didn't do, how we failed you." Reaper paused. "And that's true. All of it is true, and none of us are walking it back. But there's something else that's also true, and I think you need to hear it because I don't think anyone has said it to you in a very long time, if ever." Jack waited. "You were the best of us," Reaper said. "I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean it as a fact, the way 2 + 2 is a fact. Of every man I have ridden with in 35 years, and I have ridden with a lot of men, you were the one who understood what it actually meant. Not the patch, not the reputation, the actual thing, the brotherhood part. You understood it better than any of us." He held Jack's gaze. "And when you lost Karen, you lost yourself. And we lost you, and what we lost, Jack, what this," he gestured at the room, at all of them, "what this table lost when you left it, we never recovered. I want you to know that, I want you to know it hasn't been fine without you. We've been missing something for 15 years, and we all knew what it was, and none of us said it out loud. The kitchen was very still. Jack's hand resting flat on the counter pressed down slightly. His fingers spread. He was holding himself in place through his palms. Reaper, he started. I'm not done, Reaper said. You taught me what loyalty meant. Not by talking about it, by doing it. Martinez, Rodriguez. Every time someone went down, every time someone was in trouble, you were there first. Every time. He paused. I've been trying to be that man for 15 years. I've been trying to do what you did naturally. And I am telling you, as the person who has tried hardest to replace what you brought to that table, it is not replaceable. You are not replaceable. Jack looked away. His jaw worked. He looked at the ceiling the way people look at ceilings when they are fighting their own face. Stop, he said. His voice was rough. I can't. He stopped, pressed his lips together. You don't get to come in here and do that. You don't get to say that and have it just... He couldn't finish the sentence. I know, Reaper said. I know I don't get to. I'm saying it anyway. A sound came out of Jack, rough, involuntary, halfway between a laugh and something that wasn't a laugh at all. He turned away from all of them and stood at the kitchen sink and put both hands on the edge of it and breathed. Just breathed. Nobody moved. Nobody offered him anything. They just let him breathe, let him have the moment, let it be what it was. After a while, he turned back around. His eyes were red at the edges. He didn't acknowledge that, and neither did they. You know what the worst part of losing people is, he said. His voice was steady again, the steadiness of someone who has pushed through something rather than around it. It's not the missing. You get used to the missing. It becomes background noise after a while. The worst part is that you start to forget who you were when they were there. He looked at all of them. I forgot who I was. The man Karen knew. The man you're describing. I forgot him. I've been trying to find him for 15 years, and I can't find him anywhere in this house. He's in the garage, Gravel said. Everyone looked at him. Gravel set his plate down. He's under the tarp, except the tarp's off now. He said it simply, without drama. You couldn't let the bike die because you couldn't let that version of yourself die. You've been maintaining it, keeping it ready. 15 years of keeping it ready for a man you thought was gone. He paused. He's not gone, Jack. He's just been waiting for a reason. Jack stared at him. Emily's your reason, Gravel said. She's been your reason, but maybe you need more than one. The clock on the kitchen wall said 3:42, 18 minutes. Jack seemed to hear it too, or maybe he was just aware of the time, the way people are aware of countdowns they can't stop. His posture changed slightly. Something gathered in him. She's going to have opinions, he said, about all of you being here. Good opinions or bad ones, Gunnar asked. Both, Jack said. At the same time, she does that. Gets it from her mother. And this time the almost smile actually became a real one, brief and unguarded there and gone. But real, fully real for just a second, the smile of a man who still had love in him, even after everything. Because love that deep doesn't leave it, just goes quiet. Gunnar caught it. He looked at Gravel. Gravel had caught it too. They heard a car outside at 3:58. Jack straightened. He wasn't nervous exactly. Jack Miller had never been precisely nervous, but something in him prepared itself, set its shoulders. The way a man prepares for something important, something he knows is going to cost him emotionally regardless of how it goes. The car door, footsteps on the front path, a key in the lock, and then the door opened, and Emily Carter walked into her father's house with her waitress apron still on and her hair still in the ponytail that had mostly given up, and her eyes scanning the room with the rapid, practiced assessment of a daughter who had been monitoring her father's condition for years. She saw Gravel first, then Tank, Reaper, Gunnar, then her father in the kitchen doorway. She crossed to him in 4 steps and put her arms around him, and Jack held her with both arms fully, the way fathers hold daughters when they are grateful and guilty, and relieved all at once, his chin coming down to the top of her head, his eyes closing. Hey, Dad, she said into his shoulder. Hey, sweetheart, he said. They stayed like that for a moment. The 4 men in the living room gave it the space it needed. Emily pulled back. She looked at him with the specific searching look of someone checking for damage, not physically deeper than that. Checking his eyes, checking whether he was still in there behind them. Whatever she found, it made some of the tension go out of her shoulders. "You okay?" she said quietly. "Working on it," he said. She nodded, accepted that. Then she turned around and looked at the four of them with an expression that was complicated in the particular way of someone who has just watched something she'd been hoping for and was not entirely sure whether to be relieved or furious or grateful. She landed somewhere in the middle of all three. "You actually came," she said. "We actually came," Gravel said, "and he let you in." Eventually, Gunnar said. She looked at her father. "The garage," she said. She was asking whether they'd been in it, whether the tarp was still on. She already knew somehow. Daughters with worried hearts always know. "Yeah," Jack said. Emily pressed her lips together. She nodded once. A tear came down her left cheek, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand in one fast motion, the kind that means, "I'm not crying, don't say I'm crying." "Okay," she said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. "Okay, good." "I told you she'd pretend she wasn't crying," Jack said to nobody in particular. There was so much love in his voice when he said it that it made the room feel smaller, more contained, like all the warmth that had been missing from the house was suddenly present right there in the way he said those 10 words about his daughter. Emily shot him a look. "I'm not crying." "Sure," he said. "Dad." "You're absolutely not crying," he said. She made a sound that it was equal parts exasperation and laughter, and shook her head. Then she looked at Reaper, because everyone eventually looked at Reaper when they wanted to understand the full weight of a room. "Was it bad?" she asked him. "When you got here?" Reaper considered the question with the honesty he applied to everything. "It was necessary," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the honest one," and he said. "Bad and necessary are not opposites. Sometimes the necessary things are the hard ones." Emily studied him for a moment. "He talked to you, really talked." "He did," Reaper said. "And you," she said, meaning all of them. "Did you?" "Oh, we tried," Reaper said. "More than we have in 15 years. She absorbed that, turned back to her father. "The bike," she said. "You let them see it." "They asked," Jack said. "And you just showed them." "Yeah." Something moved across her face, something quiet and enormous and private. The expression of a daughter watching her father do something she'd been silently praying for longer than she'd ever admitted. She looked at the floor for a second, gathered herself, looked back up. "Good," she said, and her voice only broke a little on that one word. Just a little. Just enough to be human. Then she did something none of them expected. She turned to Gravel, not to Reaper, not to the easiest face in the room, but to Gravel, the one who had answered 4 calls out of 30, the one Jack had been closest to, and who had let the distance grow the widest, and she said, "He talked about you when I was little, before Mom died. He said you were the most stubborn man he'd ever met, and that's why he trusted you more than anyone." Gravel was quiet. "He said stubborn men don't quit," she said. "They just need a long enough runway." Gravel looked at Jack. Jack was looking at the floor. "I didn't say it like that," he said. "Close enough," Emily said. "I said he was a pain in the ass who never let anything go." "And that's why you trusted him," she said. Jack looked up. His eyes met Gravel's. And in that look, that long, complicated, loaded look between two men who had been brothers and strangers and had spent a morning dismantling 15 years of silence in a kitchen in Bakersfield, something shifted. Not all the way, not forgiveness, not closure, not anything with a clean name, but something real, the kind of real that doesn't come from resolution, the kind that comes from two people deciding without saying it that they are still present for each other even after everything. "You were right earlier," Jack said to Gravel. "About the bike, about what you said in the garage." Gravel waited. "I've been keeping it ready," Jack said slowly, like he was working it out as he spoke. "I told myself I didn't know why, that it was just habit, but..." He stopped. His eyes moved toward the garage door and then back. "I think I've been keeping it ready because I wasn't done. I wasn't done being the man who wrote it. I just didn't know how to start again." He paused. "I still don't know how." "You don't have to know how," Gravel said. "You just have to start." Emily was watching her father with her arms crossed and her eyes bright and her jaw set in a way that was unmistakably exactly like his. "The battery's good," Gunnar asked. Practical, direct Gunnar. "Always good," Jack said. "Tires. Checked them last month." Gunnar looked at Gravel. Gravel looked at Jack. "Jack," Gravel said. No, Jack said. He knew what was coming. Not today. I'm not asking you to go anywhere, Gravel said. I'm not asking you to ride to Ridgecrest or get back on the highway or any of that. I'm asking you to take it out of the garage. Just out of the garage. Just into the driveway. That's how it starts, Jack said. You say just the driveway, and then it's just the block, and then... Yeah, Gravel said. That's exactly how it starts. The kitchen was quiet. The clock said 4:11. Emily had gone completely still, barely breathing the way people go still when they understand that the thing they've been waiting for might be happening right now in this moment, and any movement might break it. Jack looked at his daughter. Emily looked back at him. She didn't say anything. She wasn't going to push him. She had learned in 25 years of loving this man that pushing him produced exactly nothing. She just looked at him with Karen's eyes steady and full of something she was doing her best not to let show too plainly on her face. Jack looked at the garage door. He stood there for a long moment, for a long Boston. And then he walked to the garage, and the sound of the door opening was the loudest thing that had happened in all day. Everyone followed. Of course they followed. Jack stood next to the Harley. He put his hand on the tank. Not like he'd touched the handlebar in the garage earlier, careful, tentative, like testing ice, but fully. His whole palm flat against the black tank, feeling the metal, feeling the temperature of it, feeling 15 years of his own maintenance work under his hand. He looked at Gravel. Get it started, Gravel said quietly. Just get it started. Jack Miller closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Whatever happened in that second was his and nobody else's. Maybe he was talking to Karen. Maybe he was talking to himself. Maybe he was just letting himself feel the full weight of the moment before he moved through it. Then he swung his leg over the seat. Emily made a sound, covered her mouth. The four men stood in a line and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying better. Jack sat on the Harley. He sat on it, and his body remembered immediately, completely, the way bodies remember things that matter. Posture, adjusting hands, finding the grips, weight settling into the seat, with the ease of something that had never really been forgotten, only refused. He sat on it, and he looked completely, devastatingly, exactly like himself. His right foot found the kickstarter. He looked at Emily. She nodded. Her eyes were shining, and she was absolutely, completely not crying. He kicked it. The engine caught on the second kick the way it always had. It caught, and it rumbled, and it filled the garage with sound and vibration and presence, with something that was alive and had always been alive. And the sound of it went through every person in that garage like a current, like something that had been turned off and was now turned back on. Jack sat on the running bike with both hands on the grips and his head slightly down, and for a moment, nobody could see his face. When he raised it, his eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. For the first time that day, he didn't try to hide a single thing. He looked at Gravel. He looked at all of them. Same sound, he said. His voice was barely audible over the engine. She always said she knew it was me coming back down the road because of the sound. Nobody answered him, because some things don't need an answer. They just need a witness. The engine ran for a full minute before Jack touched anything else. He just sat there, both hands on the grips, both feet on the ground, the Harley running beneath him, with the low rolling rumble of something that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. The vibration went up through the frame, through the seat, through his hands and his spine and his chest, and Jack Miller sat inside that sound, the way a man sits inside the first warm room after a very long winter, not ready to move yet, not ready to do anything except feel that the cold had stopped. Emily stood in the garage doorway with her arms wrapped around herself and her eyes fixed on her father's face. She wasn't pretending anymore. The tears were there, and she had stopped fighting them, just letting them stand in her eyes without wiping them away, and her expression was something so private and so full that the four men around her were careful not to look directly at it, the way you're careful not to look directly at something sacred. Gravel watched Jack, just watched him. He was aware of the sound the engine made, the specific voice of a shovelhead that had been properly maintained and properly loved, and he was aware that the last time he'd heard that particular engine, it had been in a different decade and in a different world, and Jack had been a different man. Or maybe the same man, just unbroken. He couldn't decide which was more accurate, and it didn't matter. What mattered was the sound right now in this garage on this Tuesday afternoon. Tank had taken his hat off. He was holding it in both hands in front of him. He didn't know he'd done it. It was just the kind of gesture the body makes when it recognizes that something important is happening and decides to pay its respects without being asked. Gunnar was not going to say a word. He had made a decision about that and he was keeping it. His throat was tight and his eyes were doing things he was not going to acknowledge in front of anyone. And for once in his life, Gunnar understood that the most useful thing he could contribute to a moment was his silence. Reaper stood closest to Jack, not close enough to crowd him, just close enough to be there. His hands were in his jacket pockets and his eyes were steady, and he was doing what Reaper had always done in the moments that mattered. He was simply completely present. All of him. No part held back. Jack let off the throttle slightly. The engine dropped to a lower, idle, steadier patient. He looked up. He looked at Emily first, his daughter standing in the doorway of the garage where he had spent 10 years sitting in a folding chair, talking to a woman who wasn't there anymore, standing there with her mother's eyes and her father's jaw, and 15 years of quiet, faithful, exhausting love for him written across every line of her face. He looked at her for a long moment, and his expression did something that had no clean translation into language. It was gratitude and sorrow and wonder, and the specific ache of a parent who suddenly sees clearly how much their grief has cost their child and loves that child more for the fact that the child stayed anyway. "Hey," he said, over the engine, just that. "Hey," she said back. "You okay?" he said. She laughed, actually laughed, short, wet, slightly incredulous. "You're asking me if I'm okay right now?" "Yeah." "Dad," she shook her head. "I've been waiting for this since I was 16 years old. I'm better than okay." Jack looked at her for another moment. Then he looked down at the tank, at his hands on the grips, at the chrome catching the light from the single bulb above him. She would have had something to say, he said. Not to Emily, not to any of them. Just out loud into the garage the way he had apparently been talking in this garage for years without knowing anyone was listening. She always had something to say. "What do you think she'd say?" Reaper asked. Quiet, no edge in it. Jack was quiet for a moment. The engine idled on. "She'd say it's about time," he said. And then she'd say, "Stop making it a whole thing and just ride the bike." A pause. And then she'd say she wants to go to that place in Ohio, the one with the good pig. Emily made a sound that was mostly a laugh and only a little a sob. She loved that place. 45-minute ride, Jack said. She used to say it was the perfect distance, long enough to feel it, short enough to be back for dinner. He took a breath, long and slow. "I haven't been to Ohio in 15 years. Nobody said anything. The engine ran. And then Gravel did something he hadn't planned. He walked to his bike, which was parked just outside the garage, and he kicked it to life. The sound of it joined the shovelhead's rumble. A different voice, different year, different story, but the same language. Tank heard it and walked to his bike and started it. Then Gunnar. Then Reaper. One by one until there were 5 engines running in and around the garage on Maple Street, and the sound of it was enormous and alive and completely unreasonable and exactly right. Jack looked up. His eyes moved from bike to bike, from face to face. "What are you doing?" he said. Not quite a question. He knew what they were doing. "Ohio's 45 minutes, Gravel said. He was on his bike now, hands on the grips, looking at Jack with that pale sky gaze that had cracked open slightly over the course of this day and not gone back to what it had been. Plenty of time to be back before dark. Jack stared at him. "I'm not going to Ohio." "Okay," Gravel said, and didn't move. "Not today, I just started it. Jack's hands tightened on the grips. "I'm not ready for the road." "Then don't go to the road," Gravel said. "Go to the end of the block." "That's what you said about the driveway." "And you made it to the driveway." Gravel paused. "Now I'm saying the end of the block." Jack looked at Emily. Emily raised both hands. "Don't put this on me," she said. "I'm staying completely out of this." "You sent them to my door," Jack said. "I did," she agreed. "Everything after that is not my fault." Jack looked at the 5 running bikes. He looked at the open garage door and the driveway and the street beyond it and the specific early evening California light that was doing something beautiful to the air that he'd been not noticing for 15 years. He looked at his hands on the grips of a bike he had built with his wife in this garage that he had maintained through a decade of grief that had started on the second kick the way it always had, the way it always would. "The end of the block," he said. "The end of the block," Gravel said. Jack was quiet for 3 more seconds. Then he clicked it into gear. He backed it out of the garage slowly, the way you do when you haven't done something in 10 years. But your body remembers it completely carefully, but not hesitantly, with the attention of someone who respects the thing they're doing. The tires hit the driveway. He straightened it. He sat at the end of the driveway for just a moment, feeling the concrete under the wheels instead of the garage floor, feeling the open air instead of the close walls, feeling the difference between being contained and being on the edge of something. Emily stood in the driveway watching him. Her hands were at her sides. She was not saying anything. She was barely breathing. Jack looked at her. "Go inside," he said. "I'll be right back." "I'm fine here," she said. "Emily?" "I'm staying right here, Dad." He held her gaze. Then something in him relaxed, not surrendered, just accepted, and he turned back to the street. He pulled out of the driveway. He was on Maple Street. The engine was loud on the residential block, filling the afternoon with sound, and a neighbor's dog started barking somewhere, and a kid on a bicycle stopped and stared at the 5 motorcycles, and none of that mattered at all. Gravel pulled out behind him. Then the others. They went to the end of the block. Jack has stopped at the corner. He sat there on the idling Harley looking down the cross street, and he didn't move for a long moment, and the other 4 came to a stop around him in the loose, easy formation they'd held for 30 years together, and they all sat there at the corner of Maple Street on a Tuesday evening in Bakersfield and let the moment be as large as it needed to be. "You want to keep going," Gravel said. He said it without pressure, without agenda, just naming what he saw. "I don't know what I want," Jack said. "I haven't known what I want in a long time." "Yes, you do," Gunnar said. Jack turned and looked at him. Gunnar shrugged one shoulder, the simple shrug of someone saying something obvious. "You backed it out. You went to the end of the block. You stopped at the corner and you haven't turned around." He paused. "You know what you want, Jack. You're just scared it's going to hurt." "It is going to hurt," Jack said. "Probably," Gunnar said. "Most things that matter do." Jack sat with that. The engine idled. He looked down the cross street and then further where it opened up toward the highway, toward the hills, toward the distance that roads become when they are big enough. He hadn't looked at distance in a very long time. Then he said Karen's pie place in Ojai. His voice was different now, still rough, still heavy, but underneath it something else, something that had been under the tarp for 10 years, just like the bike, not dead, just waiting. "They still open." Reaper pulled out his phone, looked it up. "Tuesday until 8, he said. 45 minutes, Jack said. 45, Gravel said. Jack did not make a speech. He did not announce anything. He looked at the road. He looked at his hands on the grips. And then he turned left at the corner, away from the house toward the highway, and he accelerated, and the shovel head opened up under him, with a sound like everything it had been saving for 10 years, coming out at once. And it was loud, and it was immediate, and it was alive. Gravel was right behind him before the sound had even settled. Then Tank, then Gunner, then Reaper. 5 bikes. Maple Street to Route 33. Route 33 toward the hills, the evening light coming down at an angle that turned everything gold. The kind of light that California does in October, that makes the world look like it's been lit from inside. The air was cool and clean, and it hit Jack's face and went through his jacket, and he felt it everywhere on every part of him. And it was not comfortable, and it was not easy, and it hurt exactly as much as Gunnar had said it would hurt. And it was the most alive he had felt in 15 years. He didn't think about Karen for the first 10 minutes. That surprised him. He had expected her to be everywhere the moment he got on the road, expected the grief to hit him all at once, like a physical force. Instead, there was just the road and the sound and the sensation and the 4 bikes behind him that he could feel in his peripheral vision without needing to turn and look, the same way you feel the presence of people you trust without having to check on them. Then he thought about her. He thought about the way she used to put her hands on his shoulders when she climbed on behind him, the specific pressure of it, the way she'd lean forward and say something close to his ear that he could barely hear over the engine, but always understood. He thought about Ojai, about the small table by the window at that place, about watching Karen eat pie and talk about everything and nothing while the afternoon went by outside. He thought about the 45-minute ride home, her arms around his waist, the way she always fell asleep on his shoulder for the last 10 miles, and he always slowed down to make the last 10 miles last longer. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But it was his hurt. His real actual belonging to him hurt, not the sealed up, preserved in amber version he'd been carrying in the garage. This hurt moved. This hurt breathed. This hurt existed on an open road under an open sky with wind in it, and that was entirely different from sitting in a folding chair in the dark. He let it move through him. Behind him, Gravel watched Jack's posture on the bike change over the miles. It was subtle, the kind of thing you only see if you know someone's riding well enough to read their body, but it was unmistakable. The compression that had been on Jack Miller's shoulders when he opened the front door of the greenhouse was lifting. Not gone. Probably never entirely gone, but lifting. He was sitting differently. He was inhabiting the bike differently. He was becoming mile by mile more like himself. Gravel thought, there he is. There's the man I rode with for 20 years. There he is. He did not say it out loud. He didn't have to. They pulled into Ojai at 5:43. The pie place, small brick front, a handwritten sign in the window was open half full with the early dinner crowd. 5 big men in road dust and leather walking into a small pie restaurant in Ojai was not what the other customers were expecting on a Tuesday evening. 5 big men who were not talking much, not performing anything, not doing anything except sitting down at the largest table and looking at the menu with the careful attention of people who are very glad to be exactly where they are. The waitress came. Young, not Emily, a different young woman with a different story. She looked at the 5 of them with a mixture of uncertainty and the professional warmth of someone who had learned to be friendly first and ask questions never. "What can I get you guys?" "Pie," Jack said. "Whatever kind she recommends." The waitress blinked. Jack paused. "Sorry, whatever you recommend." "Cherry's good tonight," she said. "Just came out." "5 of those," Jack said. "And coffee, a lot of coffee." She wrote it down and left. The 5 of them sat in a small restaurant in Ojai, California, with the road still on them, and nobody needed to say what this was or what it meant. The meaning was in the fact of it. The meaning was in Jack Miller sitting at a table in a place his wife had loved after 10 years of not going anywhere with 4 men who had failed him and admitted it and come back anyway. Reaper picked up his coffee when it came. He held it across the table in the direction of Jack. Not a toast, not a performance, just a gesture between men. Simple and plain. Jack looked at it. He picked up his own cup. Tank raised his. Gunner raised his. Gravel last. "To Karen," Reaper said. 2 words. All that was needed. "To Karen," Jack said. They drank. The pie came. It was good. The cherry filling was warm and the crust was real, and they ate it the way hungry people eat after a long road, with a particular appreciation of people who have been through something and come out the other side of it still upright. Jack ate half his piece and then set his fork down and looked at the table. Something was still working through him. You could see it, the processing of a day that had been 15 years in the making. His jaw worked slightly. He looked up at Gravel. "I'm not back," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Today is today. I'm not making promises I don't know if I can keep." "Nobody asked you to," Gravel said. "I know what it looked like, me getting on the bike, coming here." Jack's voice was careful, not cold careful. He was a man who had learned the cost of expectations of things assumed but not said. "I'm just saying, don't assume." "I'm not assuming anything," Gravel said. "I'm sitting in a pie restaurant in Ojai eating cherry pie. That's all I'm doing today." Jack looked at him for a moment. "You always did know when to push and when to stop." "Took me long enough to do it today," Gravel said. "Yeah," Jack said. "It did." He picked up his fork again. "But you did it." That was the thing, wasn't it? That was the whole of it. Not that they had been perfect, not that they had shown up on time or said the right things or undone the 15 years of absence with one Tuesday morning and a ride to Ojai. None of that, just they had done it. Finally and perfectly, 15 years late, and $42 in coffee and an uncovered motorcycle and a daughter's eyes and a garage full of honesty and a pie place in Ojai. They had done it. Gunner said, "So what happens on Wednesday?" Everyone looked at him. "I'm just asking," he said. "What happens tomorrow? Is there a plan?" Or Gunner, Tank said. "I'm just, let tomorrow be tomorrow," Tank said. Gunner closed his mouth, looked at his pie. "Right," he said. "Yeah, okay." Jack finished his pie. He set the fork down. He looked at the window at the street outside, at the evening light, that was going from gold to amber at the world out there that he had been on the periphery of for 15 years and was now somehow in the middle of again. "I'll call," he said. And then because he was Jack Miller and he had never in his life said something he didn't mean, "I'll actually call." Gravel said nothing. He just nodded once. The nod of a man who understood that this was a promise, not a pleasantry, and who would receive it as such. They paid the check. They went back to the bikes. The ride home to Maple Street was 50 minutes, 5 minutes longer than the ride out, because Jack took a longer route without explaining why, and the others followed without asking why. And if he was looking for Karen in the hills between Ojai and Bakersfield, if he was looking for her in the curves and the cooling air, and the sound of the engine that she had always been able to identify at a distance well, that was between Jack and the road. Emily was on the porch when they pulled up. She'd been there a while, probably. She had her arms around herself and a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. And she stood up when she heard the engines coming down Maple Street, and she stood very still until she could see him. See her father on the Harley with the chrome catching the last of the evening light, and then something in her went completely loose, like a string that had been pulled tight for 10 years finally being released. Jack cut the engine in the driveway. He sat there for a moment. Then he got off the bike and he walked to his daughter, and he put both arms around her and held her the way he hadn't held her since she was very small, fully, without the careful restraint of a grieving man trying not to pass his grief onto his child. Just fully. Just her father. "I went to Ojai," he said. "I know," she said. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I can smell the road on you." "She would have liked the pie tonight," he said. Emily laughed, wet and real. "She would have eaten yours too." "She would have," he said. "She always did." He held his daughter on the porch of the greenhouse on Maple Street, while the 4 bikes idled softly at the curb, and the evening settled in around them, and then one by one the engines went quiet. Gravel and Tank and Gunner and Reaper got off their bikes and stood in the driveway without needing to be invited, and nobody said anything because there was nothing left to say that the day hadn't already said better than any of them could. The bike stood in this driveway, uncovered, visible from the street. Exactly what it was in 1972, shovelhead black tank chrome, like a mirror rebuilt by 2 people who loved each other, and the road, in the particular freedom of going somewhere together without knowing exactly where you'd end up. Jack Miller looked at it over his daughter's shoulder. He had not sold it. He had not let it die. He had kept it ready for 15 years, through the longest winter of his life, and tonight he had taken it out and it had run exactly the way it always had, and the road had been exactly what it had always been, and the grief was still there. It would always be there. That was simply the truth of loving someone you lose, but it had moved. It had opened up. It had become something he could ride through instead of something that held him still. Tomorrow there would be phone calls and awkward silences and the slow, imperfect work of men trying to be brothers again after 15 years of being strangers. There would be steps forward and probably some steps sideways, and nothing would be fixed in a single day. Gravel knew that. Jack knew that. All 5 of them knew that. But tonight there was a man who had started his bike. Tonight there was a daughter who had seen her father come home. Tonight there was a porch in Bakersfield and 5 men who had stopped pretending, and a pie place in Ojai that still made the good cherry, and a road between here and there that had given Jack Miller back something he thought was gone for good. And on Maple Street, in the driveway of a greenhouse, a 1972 Harley-Davidson shovelhead sat in the open air for the first time in 10 years, not under a tarp, not in the dark, not waiting anymore. Because the man who built it had finally come back to ride.